The morning sun cast long shadows across the Catherian slave markets, where creatures from a dozen worlds stood chained in steel cages. The air reeked of desperation and unwashed bodies. Merchants shouted prices while buyers examined their potential purchases like livestock. In the furthest corner of the market, almost forgotten, sat a cage that hadn't seen a serious buyer in months. Inside lay what the Catherians called a defective Draconis stellaris, a star dragon. Once, his kind had been the most prized creatures in the galaxy. Their silver scales worth fortunes, their telepathic abilities legendary. But this one was different. This one was broken. Zephyr had been born without the brilliant metallic sheen that marked his species. His scales were dull gray, like old stone. Worse still, he couldn't speak telepathically to other dragons or most alien species. The Catherian scientists had declared him genetically defective, a worthless anomaly. His original owners, a wealthy merchant family from the Andorian system, had grown tired of feeding a creature that brought them no prestige or profit. 50 credits, the slave dealer, Vextar, announced to anyone who would listen. 50 credits for a genuine star dragon. Think of it as an exotic pet. Most passers-by didn't even glance at the cage. Those who did quickly moved on after seeing Zephyr's lackluster appearance. The dragon lay curled in the corner, his massive form barely fitting in the cramped space. His golden eyes, the only part of him that still held their original beauty, stared out at the world with a mixture of sadness and resignation. Zephyr had stopped hoping months ago. Dragons were meant to soar between stars, to bond with worthy companions, to live lives of purpose and freedom. Instead, he was displayed like a broken toy, his price dropping weekly as Vextar grew more desperate to clear cage space. The dragon's thoughts were interrupted by raised voices near the market entrance. A group of Catherian guards surrounded a small figure, a young human female. The humans were newcomers to this part of the galaxy, having only achieved interstellar travel within the last century. Most other species viewed them as primitive upstarts, barely worthy of notice. "Your identification papers," demanded the lead guard, a 7-foot-tall creature with blue-tinted skin and 4 arms. The human girl, who couldn't have been more than 16 Earth years old, reached into her worn jacket and produced a datapad. Maya Chen, student researcher from the Terran Science Consortium. "I have permission to observe and document alien trade practices for my xenobiology thesis." The guard examined the documents with obvious displeasure. Humans had certain protections under galactic law, but they were still considered second-class citizens by most established species. "Stay out of the way, little human, and don't touch anything you can't afford to replace." Maya nodded politely, though her dark eyes flashed with irritation. She had traveled 3 weeks in cramped transport ships to reach this backwater trading station. Her university had given her a modest budget to study alien commerce, but she was more interested in the creatures being traded than the economics. As she walked through the market, Maya's heart sank. The conditions were appalling by human standards. Intelligent beings crammed into cages barely large enough for them to stand, many showing signs of malnutrition and despair. She made notes on her datapad, documenting everything for her report, but each entry felt like a small betrayal. How could she simply observe such suffering? Her steps slowed as she reached the back corner of the market. There, in the shadows, she saw something that made her breath catch. A dragon. An actual, living dragon. She had read about the star dragons in her xenobiology classes, studied their legendary abilities and their crucial role in ancient galactic civilizations. But she had never seen one in person. "Magnificent, isn't he?" Vextar appeared beside her, sensing a potential sale. A genuine Draconis stellaris. Very rare. Very special. Alem. Maya approached the cage slowly. The dragon was larger than she had expected, easily 15 feet from nose to tail tip, with a wingspan that would have been twice that if he could fully extend it. But something was wrong. His scales lacked the mirror-bright sheen described in her textbooks. Instead, they were matte gray, like weathered granite. "What's wrong with him?" Maya asked. Vextar's sales smile faltered. Wrong? Nothing's wrong. He's just unique, special coloring, very rare gray variant. But Maya had studied dragons extensively. She knew this wasn't natural coloration. This dragon was either sick or somehow genetically different. She knelt beside the cage, ignoring Vextar's sales pitch, and looked directly into the dragon's golden eyes. What she saw there surprised her. Intelligence. Deep, ancient intelligence mixed with profound sadness. The dragon's eyes widened slightly as he looked at her, as if he was equally surprised to see a human in this place. Hello, Maya whispered. Zephyr tilted his great head. Most beings who looked at him saw only a defective product, a genetic mistake. But this small human was looking at him like he was worthy. Like he mattered. He tried to respond telepathically, as was proper, but felt the familiar emptiness where his mental voice should be. Instead, he did something he had never tried before. Something that went against everything he had been taught about proper dragon communication. He opened his mouth and spoke aloud. Hello, he rumbled, his voice deep and musical despite months of disuse. Maya gasped. Vextar dropped his datapad. Dragons speaking audibly was almost unheard of. It was considered primitive, beneath their dignity. Telepathy was their preferred method of communication. You can talk, Maya said, wonder clear in her voice. I can speak to you, Zephyr replied carefully. Though my kind would say I am broken, because I cannot speak mind to mind. Maybe you're not broken, Maya said softly. Maybe you're just different. Vextar quickly recovered from his shock. As you can see, this specimen is perfectly functional. His vocal abilities make him ideal for various purposes. For a special customer like yourself, I could offer him for merely 800 credits. Maya's heart sank. Her entire research budget was only 300 credits. She looked at the dragon again, seeing the hope that had flickered in his eyes begin to dim as he realized she couldn't afford him. I don't have 800 credits, she admitted. Ah, well, perhaps a payment plan could be arranged, Vextar began. But Maya shook her head. I only have 300 total. The dealer's expression turned to disgust. 300? For a star dragon? Even a defective one is worth more than that. Come back when you have real money, human. Maya stood slowly, her mind racing. 300 credits was everything she had. Her return transport ticket, her food money, her emergency fund, everything. If she spent it all here, she would be stranded on this station with no way home and no way to complete her studies. But as she looked at Zephyr, still curled in his too small cage, she made a decision that would have seemed insane to most beings in the galaxy. She turned back to Vexistar. What if I offered you all 300 credits? Cash. Right now, no payment plan, no delays. Vextar laughed. 300 credits? I've been asking 50 and getting no takers. What makes you think? Wait. His expression changed as he realized what she was offering. 300 credits was more than he had made from his last 10 sales combined. And this dragon had been eating his profits for months. You would pay 300 credits for this defective creature? He asked slowly. Yes. The dealer looked at the dragon, then at the human girl, then at his nearly empty credit account. Show me the money. Maya pulled out her credit chip and displayed the balance. 312 credits, her life savings, intended to get her through the next 6 months of school. Deal, Vextar said quickly, before she could change her mind. As the transaction processed, Maya felt a mixture of terror and determination. She had no idea how she would get home. No idea what she would do with a star dragon even if she could figure out transportation. No idea if her family would understand why she had given up her education for a creature she had just met. But as the cage lock clicked open and Zephyr slowly, carefully emerged, she knew she had made the right choice. You freed me, Zephyr said, his voice filled with wonder. But why? You don't even know me. Maya smiled, though her hands were shaking slightly. Because everyone deserves a chance to find out who they really are. And I don't think you're defective at all. I think you might be exactly what you're supposed to be. The dragon looked at this small human who had given up everything for him. And for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never experienced before. Hope, and something else, something deeper. The beginning of a bond that would change both their destinies forever. Around them, the slave market continued its grim business, but neither Maya nor Zephyr paid attention to the noise and chaos. They were both too busy staring at each other, realizing that their lives had just taken a turn that neither had seen coming. "What happens now?" Zephyr asked. Maya looked around at the crowded station, at her now empty credit account, at the massive dragon who was now somehow her responsibility, and laughed. It was a slightly hysterical laugh, but genuine. "I have absolutely no idea," she said, "but we'll figure it out together." And in that moment, something shifted in the galaxy. A girl who had never owned anything more valuable than a used datapad had just bought the freedom of a creature most beings considered worthless. She had no money, no plan, and no idea what she was doing, but she had something more powerful than any of those things. She had the uniquely human ability to see worth where others saw only failure, to offer friendship where others saw only utility, and that ability was about to change everything. The cargo bay Maya had rented for 10 credits was barely large enough for Zephyr to stretch his wings, but it was private and quiet. After the cramped slave cage, even this dingy space felt like luxury to the dragon. Maya sat cross-legged on her sleeping bag, dividing her remaining 2 credits worth of ration bars between them. "You should eat more," Zephyr said, nudging the larger portion back toward her with his snout. "Dragons can survive longer without food than humans." Maya shook her head stubbornly. "We're in this together now. Equal shares." The simple statement made something warm unfurl in Zephyr's chest. Equal shares. No one had ever considered him equal to anything before. He had been called defective, worthless, a genetic mistake, but never an equal. "Maya Chen," he said slowly, testing her name. "Why did you really buy me?" "The truth." Maya was quiet for a long moment, chewing thoughtfully on the bland nutrition bar. Outside their small sanctuary, the space station hummed with activity, ships arriving and departing, cargo being loaded and unloaded, lives being bought and sold. "I'm studying xenobiology," she said finally. "But the more I learn about different species, the more I realize how wrong we get things. My professors teach that dragons are telepathic, that you communicate through mental bonds, that verbal speech is beneath you. But you spoke to me. You chose to meet me where I could understand you." Zephyr shifted uncomfortably. "My people would say that proves I am defective. A proper dragon would never lower himself to vocal communication." "But that's just it," Maya said, her eyes brightening with excitement. "What if that's not lowering yourself? What if that's expanding yourself? What if you can do something other dragons can't? Speak to primitives who lack telepathic ability?" Zephyr's tone was bitter, repeating words he had heard countless times. Maya's expression hardened. "Don't call humans primitive. We may not have telepathy, but we have other gifts. We adapt. We innovate. We see possibilities where others see only limitations." The dragon studied her carefully. In his long life, he had met many species. The Catherians with their cold logic and forearm deficiency. The Androrians with their wealth and casual cruelty. The Zephyrians with their hive-mind mentality that left no room for individuality. But this human was different from all of them. "What other gifts?" he asked. Maya smiled. "Watch this." She pulled out her datapad and began typing rapidly. "I've been analyzing the metabolic data from your species' biological profiles. According to every scientific paper ever written about star dragons, you should require a diet of crystallized cosmic radiation and pure stellar hydrogen, but you've been surviving on standard organic nutrients for months." Zephyr blinked. He had never thought about it before, but she was right. The foods Vextar had been feeding him were nothing like what his people consumed. Yet he had not only survived but remained strong. "How is that possible?" he asked. "I think," Maya said, pulling up more data, "that you're not defective at all. I think you're evolved. Your body has adapted to process different types of energy. Your communication abilities have expanded beyond traditional telepathy. You're not broken, you're upgraded. The concept was so alien to everything Zephyr had been taught that he could barely process it. His entire life, he had been told he was a failure, a mistake, something to be ashamed of. But this human was suggesting he might be something better than what his kind expected. That's impossible, he said weakly. Is it? Tell me, when you try to communicate telepathically, what happens? Zephyr closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind the way he had been taught since hatching. I feel something, like a vast network of connections. But they're all blocked to me, as if there are walls I cannot pass through. Maya leaned forward eagerly. What if those aren't walls keeping you out? What if they're walls protecting others from something you don't know you're doing? What do you mean? Try to connect with me. Right now. Zephyr hesitated. You're not telepathic. It would be useless. Try anyway. Reluctantly, Zephyr reached out with his mind toward Maya. The moment he did, she gasped, and her eyes went wide. For just an instant, he felt her thoughts, her curiosity, her determination, her genuine care for him, and underneath it all, something else, a warmth and strength that was purely human. You felt that, he said, amazed. Maya nodded, slightly dizzy from the experience. It was like suddenly being connected to something vast and warm and alive. Zephyr, I don't think you lack telepathic ability. I think yours is so strong it has to be contained. But why would other dragons block me out? Maya's expression turned thoughtful. What if it's not just other dragons? What if your telepathy works on species that aren't supposed to have that ability at all? What if you can create telepathic connections where none existed before? The implications hit Zephyr like a physical blow. If Maya was right, if he could grant telepathic abilities to non-telepathic species, he wouldn't be defective, he would be revolutionary. And potentially dangerous to the established order of galactic civilization. That would explain why my birth family sold me so quickly, he murmured. If the Kytherian scientists detected unusual brain patterns, they would want to suppress it before anyone realized what you could do, Maya finished. Zephyr, this could change everything. Imagine if different species could truly communicate with each other. Mind to mind. No more misunderstandings. No more wars based on failed translations. But even as excitement built in her voice, Zephyr felt a familiar cold fear settling in his stomach. Or it could be the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, the ability to force mental connections on unwilling subjects. Maya sobered immediately. That's why they suppressed you. Not because you were broken, but because they were afraid of what you could become. They sat in silence for several minutes, both contemplating the magnitude of what they had discovered. Finally, Maya spoke again. What do you want to do with this ability? Zephyr looked at her in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, what do you want? Not what your family wanted? Not what the Kytherians wanted? Not what galactic society expects? What do you, Zephyr, want to do with your life? The question was so simple and yet so profound that Zephyr found himself speechless. No one had ever asked him what he wanted before. His entire existence had been defined by what others wanted from him or what they thought was wrong with him. I don't know, he admitted. I never thought I had choices. Maya stood and walked to the small porthole that looked out into space. Stars wheeled slowly past as the station rotated, creating a hypnotic pattern of light and shadow. Well, you have choices now, she said. We could try to find a way back to your people. Help them understand what you really are. We could go to the galactic authorities. Try to expose what the Kytherians did. We could hide, find some remote world where you could live freely. Or, Zephyr prompted. Maya turned back to him, and her expression was fierce with determination. Or we could prove that being different isn't the same as being defective. We could show the galaxy that your abilities aren't something to fear, but something to celebrate. How? I don't know yet. But humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. You're not weak. Zephyr, you're just fighting the wrong battle. Over the next several days, Maya used her research skills to hack into the station's databases, learning everything she could about dragon biology and galactic politics. Zephyr, meanwhile, practiced his abilities, learning to control the strength of his telepathic reach. What they discovered was troubling. The Catherian Consortium had been systematically identifying and suppressing any species or individuals that showed signs of unusual telepathic development. They had built their empire on being the galaxy's primary telepathic species, and they saw any competition as a threat. Look at this, Maya said, showing Zephyr her findings. 17 different species have reported births of individuals with enhanced telepathic abilities in the last century. All of them mysteriously disappeared or were declared genetically defective and removed from their populations. They're creating an artificial monopoly on advanced telepathic abilities, Zephyr realized. Exactly. And you're not the only one they've suppressed. There are others out there, Zephyr. Others like you who were told they were broken when they were actually evolved. That night, as Maya slept, curled up against his warm flank, Zephyr made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He wasn't going to hide anymore. He wasn't going to accept being called defective. And he wasn't going to let the Catherians continue suppressing beings like himself. But first, he needed to get stronger. And he needed to learn to trust the bond he was forming with this remarkable human female. Gently, so as not to wake her, he extended his consciousness toward Maya's sleeping mind. But instead of forcing a connection, he simply offered one, a bridge between their thoughts, their feelings, their very souls. Maya stirred in her sleep and smiled, unconsciously accepting the offered bond. In her dreams, she felt herself soaring through starfields on silver wings, free and powerful and unafraid. When she woke the next morning, she found Zephyr watching her with eyes that seemed to glow with inner fire. "Good morning," he said aloud, but she heard the words in her mind as well, warm and rich and filled with affection. "Good morning," she replied, and was amazed to feel her own thoughts traveling back to him along the connection they now shared. The human girl and the abandoned dragon had found each other in a slave market. Two beings that the galaxy had dismissed as insignificant. But together, they were discovering that they might be exactly what the universe needed to change for the better. And in a small cargo bay on a forgotten trading station, a revolution began with a simple telepathic good morning between species that weren't supposed to be able to communicate at all. 3 weeks after Maya and Zephyr's telepathic bond had formed, their quiet life in the cargo bay was shattered by the screech of emergency alarms. The space station shuddered around them as ships began emergency departures. Catherian battlecruiser approaching, announced the station's automated systems. All civilian vessels prepare for inspection and potential requisition. Maya felt Zephyr's fear spike through their mental link. The Catherians were here, and somehow she knew it wasn't a coincidence. "They found us," Zephyr said, his mental voice tight with terror. Maya stood and began gathering their few possessions. "How could they track you? You haven't used your abilities openly except with me." "The mental bond we share," Zephyr realized with growing horror. "It's been broadcasting on frequencies other telepathic species can detect. Every time we communicate, we're sending ripples through the telepathic plane." Through the cargo bay's porthole, Maya could see the massive Catherian vessel approaching. It was easily the size of a city, bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. Smaller ships were already beginning to dock with the trading station. "We need to run," Maya said, but even as she spoke, she knew it was hopeless. They had no ship, no money, and nowhere to go. Zephyr closed his eyes and extended his senses. What he felt made his blood run cold. "Maya, there are 17 Catherian telepaths on that ship. Not just ordinary ones, specialists, mind hunters. They don't just want to capture me. They want to dissect my brain and find out how I can bond with non-telepathic species." Maya felt her own fear rising. But underneath it was something else. Anger, pure, human stubbornness. "No," she said firmly. "We're not running, and we're not hiding. We're going to fight." "Fight?" Zephyr stared at her in disbelief. "Maya, they have 17 trained telepaths and a battle cruiser. We have What exactly do we have? Maya smiled, and through their bond, Zephyr felt something that made his scales tingle with possibility. Human determination mixed with something else. Inspiration. We have the one thing they can't prepare for, she said. We have each other. Before Zephyr could ask what she meant, the cargo bay door exploded inward. 6 Catherian soldiers poured through, their 4 arms wielding various weapons. Behind them came a figure that made both Maya and Zephyr freeze in recognition. Commander Thexial was the most feared mindhunter in the Catherian fleet. 7 feet tall, with the blue-tinted skin of his species but scars covering half his face from battles with telepathic rebels, he radiated cold intelligence and absolute authority. Zephyr of the Stellaris line, Thexial said, his voice echoing with telepathic enhancement. You have been classified as a Category 5 telepathic anomaly. You will surrender yourself for study. Study, Maya said, stepping protectively in front of Zephyr despite being barely half the commander's height. You mean torture and dissection? Thexial's scarred face turned toward her with mild interest. Ah yes, the human, the contaminated specimen. Your mental patterns have been altered by prolonged exposure to the anomaly. Fascinating. You will also be studied. Over my dead body, Maya said flatly. That can be arranged, Thexial replied, raising one of his 4 hands toward a weapon. But before he could draw it, something unprecedented happened. Maya and Zephyr's fear and determination merged through their bond, creating a feedback loop that amplified both their abilities exponentially. The telepathic energy that erupted from them was unlike anything anyone in the room had ever experienced. Every Kytherian soldier in the cargo bay staggered as their minds were suddenly flooded with images, emotions, and thoughts that weren't their own. But these weren't the cold, controlled telepathic communications they were used to. These were human emotions. Warm, chaotic, passionate, and utterly alien to their ordered thoughts. Maya's memories poured through the connection. Her childhood on Earth, her love of learning, her determination to see good in everyone, her absolute refusal to give up on those she cared about. The Catherian soldiers, who had been trained from birth to suppress emotion in favor of logic, were overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of human feeling. But Zephyr's contribution to the link was even more devastating to their attackers. His telepathic abilities, no longer suppressed or controlled, reached out and connected every mind in the room into a massive network. Suddenly, the Catherian soldiers could feel each other's thoughts, fears, and doubts in ways their rigidly hierarchical society had never allowed. Private Kexmar, the youngest soldier, was suddenly flooded with his commander's hidden doubts about the morality of their mission. Sergeant Veloth felt the fear and homesickness of his subordinates, emotions he had been trained to ignore, and all of them felt Maya's unwavering belief that every being deserved freedom and respect, regardless of their species or abilities. Commander Thexial tried to reassert control, but found his mental commands being filtered through Maya's perspective. Instead of seeing Zephyr as a dangerous anomaly to be contained, he began to see him as Zephyr saw himself. A being who had been told his entire life that he was broken, who had finally found someone who believed he was worthy of love and respect. "Stop this!" Thexial shouted aloud, his telepathic control failing for the first time in decades. But Maya and Zephyr weren't stopping. If anything, their connection was growing stronger. Through their bond, Maya began to understand the true scope of Zephyr's abilities. He wasn't just telepathic, he was a bridge builder. His mind could connect any intelligent species to any other, breaking down the barriers that had kept the galaxy divided for millennia. "You're afraid?" Maya said, her voice carrying through both vocal and telepathic channels now. "All of you. You're afraid that if people could truly understand each other, if they could share thoughts and feelings without barriers, your empire would crumble." And she was right. The Catherian Consortium had maintained power for centuries by controlling information and communication between species. They positioned themselves as necessary intermediaries, the only ones capable of facilitating complex interspecies negotiations. But if beings like Zephyr could create direct telepathic links between any species, Your dominance isn't based on superiority, Zephyr added, his voice growing stronger as he fully embraced his abilities for the first time. It's based on artificial scarcity. You've convinced the galaxy that only Catherians can provide telepathic communication, but that was never true. Through their expanding network, the Catherian soldiers were beginning to see memories and perspectives from a dozen other species. They felt the frustration of non-telepathic races who had been excluded from galactic politics. They experienced the loneliness of beings who could never truly communicate with anyone outside their own species. They saw the fear and desperation of creatures like Zephyr, who had been labeled defective and discarded. Private Kexmar was the first to lower his weapon. Through the link, he had experienced Maya's memories of finding Zephyr in the slave market. Her immediate recognition of his worth, her willingness to sacrifice everything for a stranger. The concept of such selfless compassion was revolutionary to a Kytherian mind. "Commander," Kexmar said quietly, "what if we're wrong? What if they're not dangerous? What if they're better?" Thexial spun toward his subordinate, raising a hand to strike him for insubordination. But as he did, he felt something through the telepathic link that stopped him cold. He felt Maya's instant desire to protect Kexmar, despite the fact that the soldier had been pointing a weapon at her moments before. She saw him as a person worthy of compassion, not as an enemy to be defeated. "You would defend him," Thexial said in wonder. "Even though he came here to capture you." "He was following orders," Maya replied simply. "That doesn't make him evil, just afraid." The concept was so alien to Catherian thinking that Thexial found himself struggling to process it. In his culture, opposition was met with force. Threats were eliminated. But this human was suggesting that understanding and compassion were more powerful than weapons. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. Maya and Zephyr exchanged a look, their bond allowing them to communicate volumes in an instant. Then Zephyr stepped forward, his gray scales catching the light in a way that somehow made them seem beautiful rather than dull. "We want what every being in this galaxy wants," Zephyr said. "The freedom to be ourselves without persecution. The chance to use our abilities to help others, rather than being forced to suppress them. And the opportunity to prove that being different doesn't mean being dangerous." "And if we let you go?" Thexial asked. "What then? You'll use your abilities to undermine Catherian authority across the galaxy?" Maya shook her head. "We'll use our abilities to help beings understand each other. To break down the barriers that cause wars and suffering. To show that cooperation is more powerful than domination." Through the telepathic link, every Kytherian in the room could feel the truth of her words. Maya had no desire for power or revenge. She simply wanted to make the galaxy a better place for everyone. Sergeant Veloth spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Commander, what if they're right? What if we've been causing more harm than good? What if there's a better way?" Thexial looked around at his soldiers, seeing doubt and hope warring in their faces. The telepathic link had shown them possibilities they had never imagined. A galaxy where different species could truly understand each other. Where conflicts could be resolved through empathy rather than force. "You're asking me to betray everything I've ever believed in," he said to Maya. "I'm asking you to believe in something better," she replied. The commander was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed his weapon harness. His soldiers watched in amazement as he set it on the floor. "There will be consequences," he warned. "The Kytherian High Command will not accept this. They'll send other hunters." Zephyr stepped forward. "Then help us change their minds. You've felt what we can do. How we can bring beings together. Instead of driving them apart, help us show them that there's nothing to fear from unity. And if they refuse to listen?" Maya smiled. "Then we'll just have to prove them wrong by making the galaxy so much better that they can't ignore it." As the telepathic link began to fade, Thexial made a decision that would reshape the course of galactic history. Instead of capturing Maya and Zephyr, he would help them escape. More than that, he would become their first convert. The first Catherian to publicly support interspecies telepathic cooperation. 6 months later, Maya and Zephyr stood before the Galactic Council, no longer as fugitives but as ambassadors of a new age. Behind them stood a growing coalition of beings from dozens of species, all connected by the telepathic bridges Zephyr could create, all united by Maya's vision of a galaxy where understanding trumped fear. The Kytherian representative tried to object, but his voice was drowned out by a chorus of minds speaking in perfect harmony, not the hive mind uniformity the Kytherians imposed, but the beautiful chaos of individual voices choosing to work together. The age of artificial barriers is ending, Maya announced, her words carried by both her voice and the telepathic network that now spanned the galaxy. The age of true unity is beginning, and in that moment, as beings who had never been able to communicate before shared their first telepathic words, as ancient enemies discovered they had more in common than they ever realized, as the galaxy took its first steps toward a future built on understanding rather than dominance, Zephyr understood that he had never been defective at all. He had been exactly what the universe needed. A bridge between worlds, a translator between hearts, a living proof that what makes us different is also what makes us strong. And beside him stood Maya, the human girl who had seen worth where others saw only failure, who had chosen compassion over safety, who had changed the fate of an abandoned dragon, and, in doing so, had changed the fate of everyone. Together, they had done what no army or empire ever could. They had made the galaxy a little more human, and that made all the difference.